I think it relates back to this idea of an ideal. Is a person what he or she is, or is the person most properly understood as what they could become? And I think we understand ourselves essentially in terms of what we believe we could become. Our conscience upbraids us for failure to move in that direction. And so one of the things you do if you challenge yourself is you attempt to transform yourself through tempering into that which you could be. And we're always becoming. We're not static entities, and we always exist in relationship to this ideal. And so the religious pursuit is an attempt to specify the ideal and also to specify it communally. And then we could say, well, you impose challenges to yourself to facilitate your transformation toward the ideal. And everyone understands that. Well, of course you do that. And you ever meet someone who isn't upbraided by their conscience for not being more than they are? I don't think such a person exists. Maybe the hypothetical psychopath. So, and the gratitude, I would say, that's also, insofar as it can be manifested, that's also a decision. Because you could say, the antinatalists, the people who think consciousness is so unbearable that it should just be eradicated, they think, well, the world is so corrupt and so rife with suffering that it would be better if it didn't exist at all. And you can make a perfectly logical case for that. Dostoevsky did it all the time in his novels. So, well, you can take the opposite tack and live out that. And that's a decision. To be grateful is something to strive for. It's something to attempt to manifest, like to be truthful. And it is in spite of your suffering, because the suffering can be absolutely overwhelming. It can be unbearable. You might have been through something harder. Others have certainly been through something harder. The complaints of the modern world they can't even compare to even 50, 100 years ago. I mean, it's unbelievable what our ancestors not too far from now dealt with. And yes, and you can say that really gets into gratitude. Something in you that's greater than you think that you could call on. And the evidence is that other people have gone through this. And that isn't so much, again, pointing to a lack in you necessarily as it is something that's hopeful.
What you can be.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you say, there's a psychologist, Carl Rogers, and he thought you should have unconditional positive regard for your clients. And I don't believe that's true. You should have unconditional positive regard for the parts of your clients that are trying to get better. Now, that doesn't mean you criticize and deal harshly with the other elements. That's not the point. The point is, when you're dealing with someone, are you dealing with who they are, or are you trying to foster who they could be? And which is the better attitude? And it's certainly the case with young people, and perhaps with all of us, that we like to interact with people who are calling out the best in us. If you configure your life so that what you are genuinely doing is aiming at the highest possible good, then the things that you need to survive and to thrive on a day-to-day basis will deliver themselves to you. That's a hypothesis, and it's not some simple hypothesis, right? Because what it basically says is, if you dare to do the most difficult thing that you can conceptualize, your life will work out better than it will if you do anything else. Well, how are you going to find out if that's true? Well, it's a Kierkegaardian leap of faith. There's no way you're going to find out whether or not that's true unless you do it. So no one can tell you either, just because it works for someone else. I mean, that's interesting and all that, but it's no proof that it'll work for you. You have to be all in this game. And so the idea is, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. It's like, that's actually a fairly important caution when you're talking about not having to pay attention to what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear. It's like, what it's essentially saying is that those problems are trivial in comparison. And the probability is that if you manifest yourself properly in the world, that those things will come your way is extraordinarily high. And I believe that that's exactly right. I mean, I've watched people operate in the world, and I would say that
There is no more effective way of operating in the world than to conceptualize the highest good that you can and then strive to attain it. There's no more practical pathway to the kind of success that you could have if you actually knew what success was. And so that's what this sermon is attempting to posit. It's like in the story of Pinocchio. You know, what happens at the beginning of the story of Pinocchio is that Geppetto wishes on a star. We talked about that a little bit. And so what Geppetto does is align himself with the metaphorical manifestation of the highest good he can conceptualize, and he makes a commitment. Let's say he aims at the star, and for him the star is the possibility that he can take his creation, a puppet, right, whose strings are being pulled by unseen forces, and have it transform into something that's autonomous and real. Well, that's a hell of an ambition, you know, and we're wise enough to put that in a children's movie, but too foolish to understand what it means. It's such an interesting juxtaposition that we can both know that and not know it at the same time. You can go to the movie, you can watch it, and it makes sense, but that doesn't mean that you can go home and think, well, I know what that meant. Well, people are complicated, right? We exist at different levels, and all the levels don't communicate with one another, but the movie is a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is there's no better pathway to self-realization and the ennoblement of being than to posit the highest good that you can conceive of and commit yourself to it. And then you might also ask yourself, and this is definitely worth asking, is do you really have anything better to do? And if you don't, well, why would you do anything else? You know, you remember the old fable of the grasshopper and the ant? Maybe not. I'm not going to tell it, but the ant works and the grasshopper fiddles, and the ant has a pretty good time in the winter and the grasshopper dies. And so this is like a pro-grasshopper line, but it's not, because it says something else. It says that if you orient yourself properly and then pay attention to what you do every day, that works. And I actually think that that's in accordance with what we have come to understand about human perception, because what happens is that the world shifts itself around your aim, because you're a creature that has an aim. You have to have an aim in order to do something. You're an aiming creature. You look at a point and you move towards it. It's built right into you. And so you have an aim. Well, let's say your aim is the highest possible aim. Well then, so that sets up the world around you. It organizes all of your perceptions. It organizes what you see and you don't see. It organizes your emotions and your motivations. So you organize yourself around that aim, and then what happens is the day manifests itself as a set of challenges and problems, and if you solve them properly, then you stay on the pathway towards that aim. And you can concentrate on the day, and so that way you get to have your cake and eat it too, because you can point into the distance, the far distance, and you can live in the day. And it seems to me that makes every moment of the day supercharged with meaning. That's how, because if everything that you're doing every day is related to the highest possible aim that you can conceptualize, well, that's the very definition of the meaning that would sustain you in your life. Well, and then the issue is, well, back to Noah. Well, all hell's about to break loose and chaos is coming. It's like when that's happening in your life, you might want to be doing something that you regard as truly worthwhile, because that's what will keep you afloat when everything is flooded. You might say, well, what would you want to be king? You could say king of the world or king of your own soul. What do you want to subordinate yourself to? How about your heroic willingness to encounter the unknown and articulate it and share that with people? There's no nobler vision than that. And I don't see that it's merely arbitrary. And it's not merely arbitrary too, because if you do that, to the degree that you do that, assuming your society isn't entirely corrupt you will be successful. It will actually aid you practically. You'll rise up above men. You'll be selected by women. You'll be admirable. You'll be valued. And you know that because if you look at the people that you admire and value, again, unless you've taken a detour into dark places and are possessed with admiration for people who are working for malevolent purposes and for destruction. You just have to watch the people that you admire and try to figure out what's common across them and draw your own conclusions. And you can ask yourself too, when you're torturing yourself with your conscience because you're not doing what you should be and you know it, what is it that you're torturing yourself in relationship to? You have a vision of your own ideal and you torment yourself if you're not matching it. What's the ideal? Well, you don't know, right? It's kind of incoherent and poorly articulated, but that doesn't mean it isn't trying to manifest itself and make itself known to you.